Welcome to a recording of the President's Podcast, featuring the president of Medgar College, Dr. Rudy Crew. In this episode, Dr. Rudy Crew sits down with Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. Together, they discuss education in the 21st century and how theory meets practice and where we are failing our students.
This is very, very kind of you to allow us to be here in Borough Hall, to have an opportunity to talk through what at least I consider to be, and I think to some degree you do as well, one of the more important issues of our day. Frankly, it doesn't get enough airtime, and the purpose of this conversation is really to maybe just to illuminate some of the points of view that you have that we need to hear more about and get those ideas socialized, not only in New York City or in Brooklyn, but really in the world. Right. I was just mentioning to you that I had just come back from Chengdu, China, and we're about to have a major program with them involving Mandarin Chinese-speaking teachers coming here to work with our students in the pipeline, so that there will now be language both at the college and all the way through the pipeline, so students can actually acquire that as a language. And it's a fitting place to start, because I know in a couple of speeches you made both at our graduation and other places where you've talked about, you know, from Brooklyn to Beijing. And so maybe the place for me to jump into this is, how do you frame in your own mind this notion of education and the value of connecting Brooklyn to Beijing? Why is it even in your mind that those two things even go together?
And I believe that it is so important, and just, you know, how far you are ahead of just the conversation on the development and the educating of the entire child. We still use, you know, the rope system. We still use the agrarian calendar. We're so used to just doing things because we have always done them a certain way. And it's really time to redefine education on the whole. Historically, a psychiatrist was one of the only doctors that never studied the actual organ or visit the organ that they was trying to repair. They would just give you a few pills and say, try that, then come back, let's keep trying. And neuroscientists have now connected and allow us to look at the human brain and how it operates. And now we are connected with how do we learn, how do we allow all of these various connections in our mind. We have a electronic storm going off in our brain every hour, every minute, and we have not connected that to education. We're educating wrong. And we need to be real about that conversation and start exploring, you know, what we can do. And we have to be bold in our challenges. Just the thought that we encourage students to only learn basically one language. We say we want you to learn more, but try putting up a sign in another language and see how all of a sudden you're going to be summoned and ticketed. And we look down on someone who is bilingual instead of encouraging other students in that classroom to learn that language. What we're doing around early learning, the fact that we're not teaching a child at the point when their mind is the most absorbing in development is really unbelievable. And so when you start doing what we did from the beginning of this journey together, of talking about the pipeline, how do we not only allow the children to be in that pipeline, but how do we allow also the parents to be in that pipeline so they can learn how to be a better parents for a child that's in school. And you do that is what we've done. You know, I had 6 trips to China, visiting their schools, watching what they're doing, and if we're not careful, they are going to leave us so far behind because of their willingness to really explore the depth of the educational process. And so by you going to China, creating this synergy and allowing our students to know it is possible to learn Mandarin, it is possible to learn these other languages, particularly with an entity such as China, who is, not only are they the largest population on the globe, they're going to direct which way this globe is going to move. And so it's right on, and I cannot commend you enough for that.
Thank you. One of the things that's been really interesting to me has been the sort of synergy of how you've taken to this issue of education and how the leadership you've provided here as borough president has been so much in sync with the kind of thinking that school systems really around the country should be about. It is in fact all about how the brain works as opposed to what grade are you in and you know how many Carnegie units do you have. Are there things, Borough President, that you you know, see that's sort of within arm's reach? There are things that we could do that quickly, right, that we're just not willing to take, as you said, that bold step. And if so, what are some of those things that come to mind that you would say, you know what, if we could do this by next fall?
Yes, without a doubt. And that's an amazing question, and it baffles my mind how the unwillingness of embracing. I don't have to create it, but if I know it's successful, I should duplicate it. Mm-hmm. We are in a system in the Department of Education, not only here in New York, but across America. People really don't believe. Don't let them kid you. It's easy to say, you know,
all we must educate. Can learn.
Right, they don't believe it. Right. You know, when you take some of the success stories across the globe, when you look at someone as simple as Eagle Academy, mm-hmm, what David Bank is doing in the Eagle Academy, and these young men are graduating at an 80-something percentile in an area where so few of them are reaching 30 or 40% graduation. When you look at what George Leonard did in Bedford Academy, right, when you look at some of the things that you're doing in the pipeline, when you look at these systems that are in place, but the unwillingness to scale them up, right, you begin to ask the question, why are we still spending millions of dollars to those institutions with a historical record of failing? You know, we had to renew schools. Mm-hmm. The contracts, tens of millions of dollars was spent with institutions that had a failing record, mm-hmm, and the DOE was aware of the failing record, but they still gave them the contracts over and over again. Mm-hmm. We are so used to ensuring that we protect those procurement contracts and not protect the children that is in our way. Mm-hmm. Mayoral control, you're no longer having to go through the Board of Education. Right. The mayor can make some instant changes. We need to move in a direction of looking at those examples of successful stories of educating our children. Look at their methods and allowing them to scale up. That could be done instantly. Mm-hmm. We could create an entire district where a George Leonard could come in and let's see what you're doing, right, George, right, and see if you can do it. And you did it in one school for 10. I looked at a 10-year record of what George was doing, and the numbers were steady. Right. He was hitting those 98 percentile. Right. I looked at a record of what the Eagle Academy is doing, and yet they still just have one school in ground zero, mm-hmm, of where children are not being educated or not excelling at the level. So why not allow them to scale up? You have one school, let's give you 3 schools. That scaling up process could be done instantly. And the unwillingness to do so is what is really getting in the way of finding the right product, the better mousetrap that we need to look at.
So why this is such an important conversation to me is exactly the point you're now making, because this is not about always allocating new dollars. It's about reallocating and reapportioning dollars that you have.
Without a doubt.
How the devil is in the detail of that, right? And so how do you see policy, public policy regarding education, particularly that which you can influence as borough president? How do you see the politics of that lining up so that you actually can, at least in Brooklyn, begin to lay tracks for successful students and successful schools?
I am big on the numbers must show, mm-hmm, the success. And so when I approached the mayor to give me $3 million to allow the Eagle Academy to take their methodology and not only teach Eagle Academy principals and faculty, but I said, let's take their product and let's duplicate their product, mm-hmm, so that they can package it and teach others. Mm-hmm. When we introduced that and we got the $3 million allocated, the former chancellor took that $3 million and said, we will give you a school in the Bronx to do it. Not even a borough in which I got the money for. We'll give you a school in the Bronx to do it. but you're only going to do one school, you're not going to duplicate. I had to fight and get that $3 million back. David Banks was able to now bring in these classes of educators who are really starving. Our educators are starving to get the type of training that will really help the entire child.
That's right.
Something else we can't ignore. There's a disconnect between a child's emotional stability and their ability to comprehend classroom assignments. I'm allocating over $100,000 to educate 30 teachers, middle management teachers that are going to be trainers to teach trainers. I'm sending them away to learn yoga and meditation and emotional development. My goal is to have every school in Brooklyn start their day with our children have a 20-minute of meditation and yoga to get themselves emotionally. By this time these babies get inside the classroom, they're broken. Don't tell me to learn arithmetic or algebra when I'm trying to
or even just be still.
Or be still.
Just how do I situate myself for learning? Right.
Imagine that. And I keep going back to what the science is showing us. If you do not have in your day an opportunity to go inward and sit still, just to reflect and to find a peaceful place, if you don't start building that in, the science is showing us that you are living in an unstable emotional environment. So if we do not have that part of our educational process, there's always been a disconnect between the social emotional stability of a child and what they learn in school. We almost embarrassed to talk about it. We're embarrassed to talk about how important the emotional stability of a child is.
So you know, as always, you're right on point with this, and the way that we have to start dealing with this in some ways is to have a regular school day, not a special day, but a regular school day, start to optimize the kind of learning environments that students really need. So my question now is kind of transitions a little bit to the arts, right? And I know, you know, you've done a lot of work with STEAM and the value of STEAM in the context of not just the Navy Yard and all of that, but just in terms of learning theory, right? How do you see, and to what degree do you see scaling up the arts as a natural way of being able to have students put in that kind of an environment where, on the natural, they get an opportunity to think about and reflect on and experience the arts as a value proposition in learning math, for example, or in learning learning language.
Well said. By building in the full development of that child. And you know, I am not an educator. I value the minds of great educators. And as a police officer, one thing I'm good at doing, I know how to do investigations. And for God's sakes, I know how to read. You know? And I'm looking at this data that is telling me that if you allow a child to develop not only their artistic expression, how to express themselves, how to embrace various cultures and varied understanding of art, and you can actually build it into a class curriculum where a child can learn how to express themselves artistically, which other schools of prominent means are doing. You know, the methods that they use. You try taking art out of some of these affluent schools, take them out of the Quaker school, taking them out of the Friends
Daltons
school,
and
or
all
Daltons,
that.
or Poly Prep. It's very much part of their education. We're sending a message that our children are not deserving of the same quality
or
education.
that they're not as educable. That they're just not as educable, so they don't need that.
Exactly. And we did a report recently on even the physical activity of the children, and how many of our schools no longer have gym space, inadequate gym space, and we have math teachers teaching PE, physical education, and don't really understand it, and it has become an afterthought. we're so busy teaching to the test that we're gauging the success of our principals that we're really falling short of, you know, what our children are going to need around critical thinking, around healthy lifestyles, around emotional intelligence to be suitable in the environment that we're in.
Do you think, you know, you mentioned test scores and so forth, do you think that the target we've been shooting at in education in America, do you think that that target of getting the right test scores, being able to, you know, read on grade level and on and on and on, those are important measures to an end, but they're not the end.
No, they're not.
Right?
No, they're not.
So if you could describe, you know, what you would say if you were mayor, right? Lord knows, we all hope for that. But if you could describe what you would see as being the end game, you've got an audience full of 1,100 school principals, maybe all of the teachers, 100,000 teachers in the city of New York, et cetera. What would you say is the end game? What should we always be thinking about is what this should look like at the end of the game?
We clearly have to be standards. Little Johnny must be able to do basic math. Little Johnny must be able to put a sentence together. But I think that we have to move in the direction of how do you really develop the full child.
Right.
It's great to have everyone being A+ students, but you give me a B student, a child who's a critical thinker, who's well-rounded in the arts, who is physically a stability and emotionally stable, who is consuming a healthy diet, who's exercising and know the importance of exercise, who knows how to interact with other people and other cultures and embrace their cultures. Those are the children who are going to decide the direction of this country and where we're going. If you look at the most impactful individuals during our time, the Steve Jobs and the Gates and the others, these were not the men and women at the top of their academic achievement list. These were people who were able to think beyond what they were told were possible. We need to embrace people and young people and teach them how to believe in the possibilities. And I don't always believe things are impossible based on the economic or educational standard.
Right. The way that I've always thought about this has been that there are other domains of learning beyond the academics.
Yes.
You know, we focused a lot on the academics. I'm not even sure we have that right in all schools, but at least that's what our main focus has been. Can you read? Can you write? Can you do mathematical computation at 21st century, et cetera? That list has changed as the globe has changed, right? And I think you just pointed to several other domains or several other areas that that you think are important. My sense is that if we're not careful, we'll never transition really fully away from just thinking academically. Yes. How would you help teachers, principals, educators like myself and others from the standpoint of your own leadership? How would you transition people away from the mindset that, hey, this is all about academics, to the place where this is actually about, as you said, a more holistic look at how the human brain feeds so many other aspects of our behaviors, feeds our value system, feeds how we interact with other people, feeds how we learn a second language and the value of learning a second language, et cetera. How would you make that transition?
It is so easy in New York because we have Mayoral Control. The mayor of the city of New York is solely responsible for the direction of our school system. It is easy to do, but you need the willpower to do. I think there's a few layers. One, you need educators that really believe in these children, that really believe in the possibility. Again, the data shows that an educator could be in the classroom with a group of students and make them feel as though that they cannot obtain higher heights, and those students will reach that level of a lower height. We need to really ensure that our educators believe in the possibility of our children. Then we need to explore something that is really rarely talked about, and that's the nutritional input of our students. The food our children eat gets in the way of their ability to comprehend information and to sit still, as you're talking about. This is a conversation that's rarely talked about. As I start digging into the data, it is showing me that every day the food that we're feeding our children inhibits them to fully comprehend information. There's a school out in Queens that moved to a vegetarian, plant-based diet. The children, behavior issues have gone down, their missing days in class have gone down, their ability to comprehend information, it has increased. And so we don't explore this. We don't look at what are all the ways to develop the child. And then third, allowing our children to be part of the process. You know, as you touched on, the goal can't only be academics.
Right.
You know, we must be willing to just really unlearn what we learned so we can learn. We're still using methods that are outdated. We're using an 8-track method in an iPhone age to educate our children to really be prepared for tomorrow. And that's a sad commentary. It's not easy. We're dealing with the ocean liner. You don't turn it around on a dime. 1.1 million students. Right. The number of educators, navigating the unions that are part of the system, talking about changing the hours. There are studies out there that are showing us that a child should not be starting their school day that early in the morning, right, when their body's not ready to comprehend the information. Right. We're ignoring these studies. We're ignoring all of this information. You know what I find interesting, Dr. Crew? We're in an institution that lives on proper data and information. Right. That's what we call ourselves. Right. You know, we're an institution of learning. Right. We're supposed to always go where the data takes us. Right. We do just the opposite. Right. We want to ignore the data altogether. Right. We want to ignore all the research.
No, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Instead of saying, how do we modify what we're doing based on the new discoveries that are in place so that we can properly educate children?
Last couple of questions. So I love it when I talk with you because I fundamentally wish I was back in the seat again, and I had somebody like you who really saw the value of this, because then the only hard part is doing it. Right. Right? It's not convincing somebody to do it, but then it's the execution of it, right? But there's always pushback. There's always pushback. And my experience is that when you talk about changing the agrarian calendar, when you talk about being able to have students start later in the morning, and you talk about what to do with a 12-month calendar year for learning now, not necessarily just for schooling, but for students to have the opportunity to learn. You change, by definition, you change what happens in the home. You change people's vacation. You change things that they are used to having, you know, been able to do. And so you get pushback. What would you say to a group of parents who are debating whether or not they would want to go to a school that has a more nutritious lunch schedule, a menu, or you want to have an extended learning for being able to have students catch up or do enrichment work and so on and so forth? What would you say to people who are saying, you know what, why are you changing that? It's working fine for me. My kid likes it. I like it. We have summer vacations together. Why would you change that?
So true, and you do get an awesome amount of pushback. I was speaking with the school in California where the president of the school, private school, the president of the school makes a determination after doing their research and bringing in a lot of scholars around health that the food that they were feeding their children was unhealthy, and they were going to move to a meatless menu and have a plant-based menu. She lost 50% of her student population right
overnight
off the bat.
Right.
But what happened is anytime you shake up a glass and the water starts to bounce around, if you let it sit a while, it's going to settle. So yes, there's going to be pushback. They may even reach points where people are going to be protesting and demonstrating and calling for the head of the person who's making the call. Got it. But we have to put our children first. Right. And no great victories come without a forceful battle. And we have to be up for that battle. And the mayor of the city is the person who's responsible for preparing these children. Can't be focused on re-election. You must be focused on making the right selection process for our children. If you do that, if you say, I know we're going to have those who want to be against it, but people often retrospectively say, Now I understand. And one of the greatest examples of that, to his credit, was what Michael Bloomberg was doing around smoking inside restaurants and smoking inside public spaces. There was a lot of pushback. People called him Nanny Bloomberg. People were angry. But when the data started to show the number of waiters and waitresses and people in public housing who was getting smoke-related injuries and illnesses, he was doing the right thing. And now we can't even imagine someone smoking. If someone was to light up a cigarette in here, we'd say, you know,
you got your mind. Call the police.
So yes, there will be pushback. We're clear on that. But it's time to hit the reset button on education. We are doing it wrong. And it's time to be bold enough to take it in incremental levels. At least let's start moving in the right direction. And one of the most important aspects of it, part of the DOE budget, must go into doing some of the stuff you're doing with a pipeline. That child that starts out in 3K or pre-K, they should know that here's a college that I can enroll in, even if they don't go to college. You need to at least know what you are aspiring towards. And that is something that is missing. It's a disjointed system that's not connected. What a child may learn in elementary school is not going to be available in the middle school in his area. If he's in middle school, it may not be available in the high school. Too many of our children, by the time they reach high school, they're told, okay, you want to go to medical school? Hey, you were supposed to take that chemistry class. Long time ago. Oops, I didn't take it. Right. So stopping all of those systems, taking the blockage from the pipeline is something that we can do instantly. It's a low-hanging fruit. There's many low-hanging fruits that we can do. And I believe that this chancellor is talking the right game of getting it done. He's going to have some pushback in the process, but if he's willing to get it done and take the bumps and the bruises that comes with it, I think we could accomplish some good things.
I think you're right.
And I think that what you said is so important. The hard part is implementation. If you have people around you who at least understand it, then you can make it an easier task. And I don't know if we have enough people in the system that understand we're moving in the wrong direction.
That is actually a segue to our close here, because most of us want to run the race, right? But I don't always know everybody wants to win. I mean, there are a lot of people who really enjoy getting some new Nikes, you know what I mean? Get a nice, pretty running suit and whatnot. But they're show horses. You know, they're really not, they're not all that interested in winning this race on behalf of our kids. Most of the teachers are. Most principals I've ever met in my career are. Most superintendents are. The real question is, how do you get the politics to line up with the pedagogy? So what you did today was you laid out really clear, new, and powerful pedagogy of a 21st century. How to think about how learning takes place using the brain and brain theory, how to organize schools differently. That's all relatively new, and as we talked about, that's actually stuff that could be done. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to actually connect the body politic to the real politics that makes it possible for that to happen.
Well, that is so well said, and what is, I believe, is fascinating in an institution like the Department of Education is that if you have the wrong person or people in very key positions, it doesn't matter what the masses want to do. It's just enough you're in the right person to block the movement forward. And institutions like the DOE, they are masters at
permanent government.
And they will tie you up
forever.
I don't care how many mayors.
The IRS would get lost in there. I know it. I do know.
So the key is, and I always borrow from the police department scenario. I think it was a blessing for me to have served for 22 years in the department not only because I was there for 22 years, but I was there during the cultural change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dr. Crew, we were having 2,000 homicides a year in the
remember.
city.
I remember.
98,000 robberies, almost 100,000 felonious assaults. And all of those people who were commanders who had to implement the change when Jack Maple and Bill Bratton were saying we could live in a safer city, there were a whole row of commanders.
Said, no, not going to happen.
Exactly.
Not going to happen.
They had to make the bold decision of ridding and moving a large chunk of those commanders out, so everyone else got the memo that we're serious about this. And do you know, in year one, the impossibility that people always said it would never happen, in year one, we went down 400 homicides. And 25 years later, no matter who was the mayor, police commissioner, we've never had another increase in crime. 25 consistent years of decreasing crime. Property value went up, businesses came here. The Brooklyn that we know has continued to grow and convert. That is what can happen inside the Department of Education. With the right cultural change, using technology, and making sure you monitor who's in the right key positions that is preventing the progress from taking place. It is very possible. We've heard the term impossible when the police said we could be safer. We knew they were wrong then, and it's also wrong to believe it's impossible to grab our hands around one of the largest school systems in the country. And we can do it. It's very possible to do, and I'm energized and ready to do it. And tied to that, as I say over and over again, is really believing that we can.
Yeah.
There's a lot of non-believers out there.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, as always. Thank you very much, brother. Thank you.
You've been watching an episode of the President's Podcast with Dr. Rudy Crew. To learn more, visit us online at mec.cuny.edu.